So I'm a little late getting to this one, but I still wanted to cover it because honestly, this is a pretty good one. I watched the first episode and realized that I really needed to brush up on my Cyberpunk knowledge, so I re-downloaded the game, and quite quickly it had me by the balls. But all that said, I'm not going to talk about the game too much. In this vid, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the Cyberpunk universe, I'm going to do an Edgerunners plot recap, I'm going to talk about Adam Smasher a bunch, and then I'm going to give you my thoughts on the whole thing. But before we do, make sure you hit like on the video and subscribe if you're new. Cyberpunk paints a picture of a dark future centering on Night City, which is kind of like a Blade Runner type city, you know the one, like this terrifying but ultimately ultra cool vision of the future. It's a city that's overrun with crime and corruption, and you know the deal, right? Basically, people have come to prioritize technology over humanity and have become colder and crueler and more selfish. People have become so obsessed with enhancing their abilities that they undergo procedures to, I don't know, let's say replace an arm to get more upper body strength, or get a better eye put in for, better vision. And then you get guys like this, like, what the fuck? To do this, you'd have to scoop out half of your brain. These procedures are performed by Ripper Docs, often in back alley basement labs. The city is full of gangs and cyberpunks who are these mercenaries who'll do anything you pay them to do as long as you can afford it. The city has become so overrun with crime that the police hire mercenary groups to help them fight crime, and these groups are often just as bad as the criminals themselves. Even the NCPD itself has a reputation for being really brutal and heavy-handed, probably as it's owned by the Arasaka Corp. Now, the Arasaka Corp is this huge mega corporation dealing with banking, manufacturing, security, military tech, you name it. It sounds like their claws are into everything. So going way back, initially the story revolves around a band called Samurai and its members, including its singer Johnny Silverhand, who, long story short, becomes to be labeled a terrorist when he blows up the Arasaka building. Cyberpunk 2077 revolves around a merc called V, who kind of stumbles into this storyline, but I'm not going to get too much into, the story there for fear of spoilering, and to be honest, I don't know the full details myself. Edgerunners is a standalone story that is set a little bit before Cyberpunk 2077 and centers around David, a young kid whose mom is struggling to make ends meet, let alone pay for this fancy, expensive school that he's enrolled in. She works as a paramedic and makes a little cash on the side by selling any cyberware she comes across. And that's our entry point in Edgerunners. That's where we start, with this military guy going full cyber psycho and slaughtering a bunch of cops in what is an insane introduction to the next 10 eps. It's so vivid and bright and fast that it's almost bewildering and dizzying. It is brutal, it is harsh, and it's an amazing way to set up what's to come. So this guy's ex-military, who the Arasaka Corp were running experiments and tests on. The thing is, though, the more you modify your body, the more susceptible you become to cyber psychosis, where you start out trembling and having visions, then you get wildly aggressive outbursts, and it usually only ends one way. After the cops take this guy down, David's mother is one of the paramedics called in to clean up, and she manages to procure this. This is a San Devistan, and it locks into a user's spinal cord and nervous system, and once triggered can make you move so fast that to a bystander, it almost seems like you're teleporting. David's mother is planning on selling it to a gang of cyberpunks who we'll get to shortly, but after she and David are caught in a crossfire on a highway chase, she's killed, and David decides that he's had enough and takes it to a local Ripper Doc to tell him to implant it in him. Put it in me good. So he uses it to get revenge on the school bully, but these guys soon show up wanting their tech. Now, I think I missed this, but I'm told that apparently David's mum wanted to join their crew to become an Edgerunner herself. So upon hearing that she's dead, this kind of softens the leader, this huge guy called Maine, and eventually David joins their crew, falls in love with this girl Lucy, and Maine kind of becomes a father figure to him as they start to do a bunch of mercenary jobs. So right here, let's come back to the story in a second, because I want to talk about the way Night City is portrayed in this anime, because it's very faithful to the game and existing universe while also doing its own thing. It's somehow really dark and bleak and depressing whilst being bright and vibrant and gaudy and kind of like nauseating in a way. Like visually, it's really intense. Those hyper cool visuals are paired up with a hyper cool soundtrack, as you'd expect. And there are loads of familiar visual cues if you're familiar with the game. Like I noticed David's apartment was very similar to V's. The nightclub, whose name I forget, is in here. This button, I noticed this button right here was kind of the... Oh, the monk! I just did that side mission! Yay. And as you'd expect from an anime that had been overseen very closely by Project Red, it does slot in very nicely to the universe. What the animation studio Trigger have brought to the table, though, is in my eyes what puts this show over the top, though, because the way that it moves, the way that it flows, like some scenes have almost no movement in them at all, but others zip around like crazy. There's a particularly good sequence in one of the later episodes where the guys are trying to stop a convoy, and I won't say too much, but, you know, amazeballs. Okay, back to the story, and again, without spoiling every little detail, the surprising thing about David is that he has a very high tolerance for cyberware. There's something about his genetic makeup that means that he can stave off the cyberpsychosis better than anyone, so he quickly gains the attention of Arasaka Corp. They promise him that his transgressions will be expunged, they'll make him very, very rich, and he'll have a fancy future, but he's still angry at what happened with his mother, so he flips them the bird. Where does that expression come from? Does it look like a bird? How do you flip a bird? So the majority of the plot revolves around a fixer called Faraday, who sends our guys on assignments to, for example, steal data from Arasaka Corp executives on behalf of Militech, who's Arasaka's main rival. But basically one of the missions goes kind of awry, and it gets all kinds of complicated. Now there comes a point where the plot starts to include talk of an experimental cyber skeleton, not to be confused with the Arasaka Dai Oni suit that Adam Smasher wears. I say not to be confused because I confused it with that. Because I smart. But in any case, this cyber skeleton is a huge walking battle armored tank. Oh shit, no, I did it better last take. This huge walking weapons platform that takes the concept of body modding to a whole other level. And you quickly start to see where this is going, right? And if you don't, well, let me explain it to you. A few hours into the game, you meet this character called Adam Smasher. Now, Adam Smasher is a bodyguard for the Arasaka head honchos. Again, not going to get into too much detail. But if you want more detail, I'm going to give it to you, whether you want it or not, despite what I just said. But come on, the video's titled Adam Smasher Explained. Unless I change the title at some point, because I do that sometimes. So Adam Smasher was a fairly typical gang punk who, after his gang was wiped out, joined the army. After several years in uniform, he was kicked out before becoming a cyberpunk again. He was kicked out for bad conduct because he's just a nasty piece of work. So once he goes back, so he takes his brutalness and sadisticness back to the streets before one job ends with him being reduced to smush by an RPG blast. And eventually a corporate suit shows up, offers him a second lease on life by becoming the towering monster that we all know. Sup, brah, you look like Smush, you wanna be a robot? And in the process, losing whatever's left of his humanity in the process. Over the next several years, he would take on as many jobs as he could. The only stipulation being that civilian casualties and collateral damage, just part of the deal, man. And the more of it, the better. Good times. Then he realized that he was being recruited by Arasaka the whole time, and he was sent to fight in the Fourth Corporate War, which was great for him because he thought it would allow him to fight his great rival, this guy called Morgan Blackhand, who had enlisted for Arasaka's great rival, Militech. Then came the massacre of Arasaka Tower, where Smasher and Blackhand finally faced off, and I already mentioned how that ended. Remember earlier in the video? What do you mean you zoned out? With a nuclear detonation and Johnny Silverhand being branded a terrorist, and no more zoning out, okay? After that, Smasher was assigned to be Yobinuru Arasaka's bodyguard. He's the son of the father, the father, I can't remember his name. Anyway, back to the plot of Edgerunners. It all boils down to David having to save Lucy, and to do so he has to strap himself into this and make himself into this robotic colossus, as we find out that this whole time Faraday had been working for Arasaka Corp to bring in the only person able to handle interfacing with the thing. Now this cyber skeleton is a beast, man. As well as using David's super speed, it can create gravity fields, which gives it almost superhuman telekinetic abilities. Like at one point they're in this truck being squished against the wall and he picks it up so they're floating and they end up going like on top of the other truck. It's pretty amazeballs. It can also turn multiple opponents' firearms against them, which creates all kinds of bloody chaos. So David, only being kept from total mental breakdown by huge doses of meds, takes out a whole army of Militech guys, then goes up against Arasaka to get Lucy out of the hands of Faraday, when Arasaka bring in the only thing that can stop David at this point, and yep, you guessed it, that's Adam Smasher himself. So by the last ep, things are going absolutely mental, with the question being, will David be able to keep control long enough to free Lucy? I reckon if David didn't have the cyber psychosis to contend with, he might have been able to take Adam Smasher. or at least put up more of a fight. But in the episode, and no matter what reason you pick, there's a pretty big gulf between Adam Smasher's level and David's level. But the way it goes down is kind of a bit, with David in the middle of a fight suddenly being distracted by what's happening with Lucy, and Adam Smasher shoots him in the abdomen. So you never really get a good idea of what David could do at his full potential against this guy. One thing that strikes me is that these guys who can tolerate large amounts of cyberware are clearly quite rare, and it's incredible how high Adam Smasher's threshold is. We never see him needing the meds needed to fend off the meltdowns that we see some of the other characters undergoing. Like, did you see what David was going through towards the end there? When David tries his San Devistan trick, he realizes that Smasher can do exactly the same thing. And Smasher is like, yeah, San Devistan is a cheap bit of kit, really. It's kind of outdated now, The insinuation being that Adam Sandler, I knew I was going to call him Adam Sandler. The insinuation being that Adam Smasher here has got far more advanced wares under his hood? Manhood? No, that's weird. Oh, and I love the guy who'd chromed his dong. That was funny. Like, why? Why would he do that? Does that give him more, prowess in that department? Anyway, the ending of Edgerunners is a really nice ending. David sacrifices himself for Lucy so that Lucy gets to fulfill her ambition of visiting the moon, and it's really nice, it's really lovely in this sort of tragic way. A couple of things that I will talk about though. Casting this guy as the voice of Faraday made it pretty obvious that it was going to go the way that it did. When you're first introduced to Faraday, it's pretty obvious that he is kind of a dodgy character. When you recognize this guy's voice, it's a guy who's so famous for playing villains, you can see the double cross coming a mile off. The fact that Maine's big gun, this gun that could pretty much one-shot just about anybody, kept jamming at the worst possible time, did get a little annoying. The criticism that I keep seeing around the internet is that it was a little predictable, and in hindsight, maybe a little bit. But actually, as I was sitting there watching it, absorbing it into my brain, that didn't occur to me at all. I was thinking a lot about the references from Akira and Ghost in the Shell, and about whether it's borrowed from those things too much. But predictable? No, not really. Maybe though. Yeah, probably. Yeah, no, probably not. No. There's a really nice moment where David, kind of knowing that he's too far gone, he's in the cyber skeleton, he knows this is only going to end badly, and he stands on the roof of Arasaka Tower and he looks off and he thinks of his old dead mom and he goes, "Look, Mom, I finally made it to the top of Arasaka Tower, just like we talked about, And that really pulled at my old heartstring. And when it was all said and done, I'd felt like I'd gone on quite the journey with David and the gang. There were a couple of things that didn't add up to me in there, but I won't really get into them because it could be that I just didn't know parts of the lore. Sometimes in certain animes, I find it hard to sort of bond with the main character. Again, this might be a problem that's just quite specific to me, but ultimately if you don't care about the main character, then it's hard to summon a fuck to give about the entire thing. But this is not a problem that I had with Edgerunners. David is a really good character and you feel every kick in the balls that life has to give him. Overall, yeah, I was really happy with the way they rounded it off. If we're not going to get a season 2 with David, then I think this was a great way to send him out. I have seen a couple of videos online calling this perhaps the best anime ever. I wouldn't go that far. I still think that Akira and Ghost in the Shell are probably in a league of their own. But this is nonetheless very, very solid and visually pretty amazing. Get your eyes ready. So let's leave it there, guys. Get in the comments and let me know your thoughts. I'm really eager to hear them. And I will see you very soon for the next one. Thank you very much for watching and cheerio, bye!